I was sitting in Sherlock Holmes's rooms in Baker Street. He was looking at my boots. "Why Turkish?" he asked. "They're made in England," I replied. "I bought them yesterday." "I can see that," he said. "Anyway, I didn't mean your boots. I meant the bath." "Why did you have a Turkish bath?" "It's good for my health," I said. "I wanted a change." "You shouldn't let the assistants at the baths tie your bootlaces. You tie them better yourself." I looked at my laces and saw the knot was in fact tied a little differently to the way I usually tied my knots. Incredible, I thought. He notices the smallest differences. You said you needed a change. How about going to Lausanne, Watson? First-class tickets, and all expenses covered, Holmes asked. Great. But why? Holmes sat back and took out his notebook. One of the riskiest groups in the world is lonely women without friends. They are harmless and often helpful, but they can lead others into crime. They are lost, moving from place to place, staying in pensions and boarding houses. When they disappear, no one notices. I fear something has happened to Lady Frances Carfax. I was glad he got to the point. Holmes checked his notes. Lady Frances, he went on, is the last living relative of the late Earl of Ruffton. The estates went to the males. She has some money and unique old Spanish jewelry she's very attached to. She always carries it, won't leave it with her banker. She's a beautiful woman in her middle years, the last of a once large family. What happened to her? That's the mystery. She used to write to her old governess, Miss Daubney, every 2 weeks. It's been almost 5 weeks since the last letter, from the Hotel National in Lausanne. She left there without an address. Her wealthy family is worried and will pay to solve this. Anyone else knows about Lady Frances? I asked. The bank does, Holmes replied. She banks at Sylvester's. The last check before her disappearance paid her Lausanne bill. The most recent one, for £50, was to Miss Marie Devine. It was cashed at Credit Lyonnais in Montpellier, but we don't know where it was drawn. Who is Miss Marie Devine? She was Lady Frances's maid. I'm sure you can find out why she received that check. Me? Yes, you're going to Lausanne. I can't leave London. Scotland Yard needs me. If you need help, send a telegram. 2 days later, I was at the Hotel National in Lausanne. Lady Frances, around 40, had stayed there for a few weeks, liked by everyone. Her trunk was always locked, and her maid, Marie Devine, was engaged to a waiter. Her address was 11 Rue de Trajan, Montpellier. I gathered this information like Sherlock Holmes. The mystery continued. Lady Frances left Lausanne suddenly, and no one knew why. Jules Vibart, the maid's boyfriend, suggested it was because of a visit from a mysterious bearded man. He was English, but had no name. After this visit, Lady Frances left. Marie, the maid, also left her job without saying why. I had to go to Montpellier to find out from her. Then, I followed Lady Frances to Baden. She stayed at the Englischer Hof and became friends with Dr. Schlesinger, a missionary, and his wife. Lady Frances found comfort in religion and helped care for the doctor. They all went back to London 3 weeks ago, and we hadn't heard from her since. Marie, the maid, left her job before that. Dr. Schlesinger paid the bill. The innkeeper mentioned that someone else came looking for Lady Frances Carfax not long ago. This person was English, but seemed unusual, like a tough, sunburned farmer. A bit scary, if you ask me. It was clear that Lady Frances was being chased by this frightening person. She was scared, and that's why she left Lausanne. He kept following her. Maybe he already caught up to her? Was that why she's not in touch? Couldn't her friends protect her from this bad person? What's his evil plan? That's the puzzle I need to solve. I wrote to Holmes about my progress, but he sent a weird message asking about Dr. Schlesinger's ear. I ignored it and went to Montpellier to find the maid, Marie. Marie told me that Lady Frances had been nervous and thought she wasn't honest. That made it easier for Marie to leave. Lady Frances gave her £50 for her wedding. Marie also didn't trust the man who drove Lady Frances from Lausanne. She saw him grab Lady Frances's wrist by the lake. Lady Frances was always scared. As she talked, she suddenly got really scared. "Look," she said. "That man is still following us. He's the one I talked about." From the sitting room window, I saw a big, dark man with a wild black beard walking down the street, looking at house numbers. It was clear he was after the maid, just like me. I decided to approach him. "You're English," I said. "What if I am?" he replied with an unfriendly look. "Can I know your name?" "No, you can't," he said firmly. The situation was awkward, but being direct can help. "Where's Lady Frances Carfax?" I asked. He stared at me in shock. "What did you do to her? Why are you chasing her?" "I need an answer." I insisted. The man got angry and attacked me like a wild animal. I can handle myself in a fight, but this guy had a powerful grip and was furious. He had his hand on my throat, and I was almost out of breath when a French worker from a nearby cafe, in a blue shirt, rushed over with a stick and hit the attacker hard on the arm. This made him let go of me. He stood there, angry and unsure if he should attack again. Then, growling with anger, he left and went into the cottage I had just come out of. I turned to thank the man who had saved me, standing next to me on the road. "Well, Watson," said Holmes, "you've made quite a mess of it. I think it's best if you come back to London with me on the night train." An hour later, Sherlock Holmes, dressed as usual, was in my hotel room. He explained that once he realized he could leave London, he decided to intercept me at the next logical place in my journey. He'd been waiting in the cafe in disguise as a worker. Holmes explained that he'd come here because he was in contact with Lady Frances's governess, Miss Daubney. A man named Philip Green, who was staying at the same hotel, came up. He seemed puzzled by my presence. Holmes introduced me and explained that I was helping with the case. Green apologized for his attack in the street and explained that he was nervous. He wanted to know how Holmes had found out about him. Holmes mentioned that Miss Daubney, Lady Frances's governess, had kept in touch with him and remembered Green from the past. Green confessed his deep love for Lady Frances, but she stopped seeing him due to his wild past. However, she stayed single because of her love for him. He tried to win her back, but couldn't. Lady Frances left Lausanne and was later found in Baden, but she disappeared again. Holmes advised Green to go back to his hotel, offering his card and reassurance. Holmes got a telegram saying jagged or torn from Baden, indicating a dangerous man, Reverend Dr. Schlesinger, also known as Holy Peters. He tricks lonely women using religion. His wife, Mrs. Fraser, helps him. Holmes believed Lady Frances was in their control, possibly dead. We had no way to know where she was. Holmes planned to talk to Lestrade at Scotland Yard later. The police in Holmes's team couldn't solve the case. The three people we were looking for seemed to vanish in London. Advertisements and clues didn't help. Then, a pendant with an old Spanish design was pawned by a man who seemed like a clergyman. He matched Schlesinger's description. Our bearded friend from the Langham Hotel kept asking for news. Holmes decided to involve him. He's starting to pawn the jewels. We should catch him now. But does this mean something happened to Lady Frances? Holmes nodded seriously. If they've kept her prisoner, they can't let her go without risking their own capture. We must prepare for the worst. What can I do? They don't know you by sight, do they? No. If he goes to another pawnshop, we'll have to start over. But if he needs money, he might return to Bovington's. I'll write a note for you to take there, and you can wait in the shop. If he shows up, follow him, but no mistakes, and no violence. I trust you won't take any action without my approval. For 2 days, the Honorable Philip Green didn't bring any news. On the third evening, he entered our sitting room, pale and trembling, full of excitement. Philip Green rushed in, exclaiming, "We have him! We have him!" Holmes calmed him and asked for the story. He explained, "She arrived an hour ago. The pendant she brought was identical to the other one. She's a tall, pale woman with sharp eyes. I followed her to an undertaker's shop." Holmes nodded. "That's the lady." He continued, "She left the shop, and I followed her to a house in Brixton, number 36, Pulteney Square. As I watched, a van arrived with 2 men carrying a coffin. They went into the house. I was about to rush in, but she saw me and closed the door. Holmes praised him and wrote a note, saying we needed a warrant to enter legally. He advised Green to take the note to the authorities and get their help, assuring him that Lestrade would handle the details. Green worried, but what if they harm her while we wait? What does the coffin mean, and who else could it be for but her? Holmes told Mr. Green we'd do our best. We believed the lady was in trouble and we had to act quickly. Holmes thought that the lady had been brought to London against her will, and her maid had been frightened away. He suspected she was held in a house in Pulteney Square and needed help. Holmes and I rushed to the square and went to an undertaker's shop. We wanted to know when the lady's funeral was happening. The lady was supposed to be dead, but Holmes thought it was a trick to hide her. We couldn't wait for the police. We needed to act fast. We went to a house in Pulteney Square. Holmes rang the doorbell, and a tall woman answered. Holmes wanted to see Dr. Schlesinger. The woman tried to close the door, but Holmes stopped her. She eventually let them in and said her husband, Mr. Peters, would come. Peters entered, and Holmes accused him of being the man we were looking for. Peters denied it, saying he must have made a mistake. Holmes insisted that Peters was the person we were after. Peters claimed he had a bill against the lady we were looking for and that she left without paying. Holmes vowed to find her. Peters admitted that he had paid her bill and her ticket to London. She disappeared in London, leaving her old-fashioned jewelry behind to cover her debts. Holmes was determined to search the house to find her. Peters demanded to see a warrant from Holmes, who showed him a revolver instead. Peters called for a policeman, and Holmes warned that any attempt to stop them would lead to harm. We proceeded into the dining room where the coffin was located. Holmes opened the coffin and was surprised to find an old, emaciated woman inside, not Lady Frances. Peters revealed the woman was an old nurse named Rose Spender and that they had brought her to their house to care for her after finding her in a workhouse. She died 3 days later. They arranged for Stimson and Company to handle the funeral, scheduled for the next morning at 8 a.m. Peters insisted Holmes had made a mistake and should admit it. Peters called for the police, and a sergeant and constable arrived, asking Holmes to leave since he had no warrant. Holmes and I had to go. We returned to the street, and Holmes remained calm, while I was upset. The sergeant offered help if needed. Holmes explained that we were looking for a missing lady we believed was in that house, and we expected a warrant soon. We then went to the Brixton Workhouse Infirmary, where we confirmed that a couple had taken an old woman, claiming she was their former servant, and that she had died later on. Holmes and I investigated further, speaking with the doctor who had signed the certificate for the old woman's death. The doctor saw nothing suspicious. We then went to Scotland Yard and faced some delays regarding the warrant. We received news from the sergeant that there were flickering lights in the dark house, but no one entering or leaving. The next morning, at 7:20, he knocked on my door. Quickly, he said, "It's life or death, Watson, and very little chance of life. What time's the funeral? 8:30, I replied. 50 minutes later we were at Mr. Peters's house again. 4 men were carrying the coffin to a carriage outside the house. Holmes confronted them, saying they needed to take it back until the warrant arrived. He demanded the coffin lid be removed. With a few tools, we pried open the coffin, revealing what was inside. Holmes and I opened the coffin and discovered the unconscious Lady Francis, who had been drugged with chloroform. Holmes worked to revive her with medical assistance. Lestrade arrived with a warrant just as the Lady Francis showed signs of returning to life. Holmes realized that the key to the mystery was a remark by the undertaker's wife, who mentioned that the coffin was out of the ordinary. This made Holmes suspect that the coffin was larger than needed, allowing another body to be hidden underneath. The plan was to bury 2 bodies under one certificate. We acted quickly to stop the burial. Holmes explained that even he could make mistakes, but the key was to recognize and correct them. The coffin's unusual size had given them the clue they needed to solve the case.